Welcome to another Army Masterclass, where we deep dive an Age of Sigmar list that's hopefully useful to new players and the pros. Hi, I'm Rob from The Honest Wargamer. I host live streams about Age of Sigmar. Specifically, we do a show on a Monday called the Age of Sigmar Stat Center, where we look at the army lists that have done well at tournaments of the weekend, and we also collate all the stats on our website so you can check out which armies are doing well. We also live stream competitive Age of Sigmar tournaments on the T-Sports Network on our Sunday show, The Objective Zone. You're meant to just play the game, not ruin the game.
Look, it's rare that AOS tournament is won by a 40k list, so it's the first time for everything.
Today's Army Masterclass is on a Stormcast Eternals list called the Reign of Stars. It's an AoE damage-dealing mortal wound list that's fairly unique thanks to the war scrolls that you can find in the Stormcast Eternals book. And also another book. The interesting thing about this list is how it deploys the damage, how it applies that damage to the enemy army, and then what it does to disrupt the enemy army even at deployment. It applies loads of area of effect, mortal wound damage on units that sometimes are normally safe behind screens. It does this by applying multiple stacks of very elite damage in mortal wounds to the enemy's key pieces. The area of effect nature of this means that you can't deploy your army how you traditionally would, and therefore it disrupts you straight away. That's because armies like to deploy close to each other. Lots of things inside Age of Sigmar require buffs, which are positive bonuses that you give to your units, and normally they require you to be within some range of a character or another unit. These overlapping buffs and synergies are quite important and quintessentially how you really build Age of Sigmar armies. Some armies have more synergy, some armies have less synergy. This list obviously does incredibly well into enemy armies that are looking to synergize to maximize their output. While this list has a few variations, one of the players who's played it the most last GHB and is intending to play it next GHB is Owen Jackson. He's built a new version to play in this General's Handbook and is very excited to talk about it in our interview.
That lovely little frog that we all love on this little chair.
Stormcast, as an army, have several list archetypes. With such a broad roster, it's quite easy to build several different styles of army. All Stormdrake guard lists are very popular, and lists usually consist of key units like Fulminators, Long Strikes, and a Lord Relictor. Stormcast Eternals are the most popular army at Warhammer Age of Sigmar tournaments. Obviously, this is due to it being the lead faction in the setting and has had the most releases in the game. I mean, they're pretty boring, but I mean, don't tell anyone I said that. I mean, they're just gold guys. Like, boo. Like, gold guy, goblin. Over the course of the last General's Handbook, they had a 49% win rate as a faction. Okay, let's start simple. Let's take a quick look at the list and a simple unit overview. This is a Stormcast Eternal Stormkeep army from the sub-faction Hammers of Sigmar. The general is a Lord-Celestant on Stardrake with the command trait Master of Magic, the generic artifact, the Arcane Tome, and the mount trait, Celestial Instincts. Because he is a wizard, he's chosen the spell Celestial Blades. As a unit, he's a support, damage-dealing anvil, all of the things. The Celestant-Prime is in the list as a damage-dealing hero. The Slann Starmaster is a ranged damage dealer and brings all the support wizards brings to an army. There are 2 units of Vanquishers, which are cheap Battleline units that fulfill the screening and objective role. There is a big damage-dealing unit in the unit of 4 Fulminators. And then there's a unit of Farstriders as cheap screens and objective grabbers. And the other spell, the Everblaze Comet, which is an AoE damage dealer. Okay, skip ahead if you don't like it, but it's time to talk stats. It's cute. Games Workshop are doing their own little meta watch. I've been doing this for over 5 years, and the stats sometimes don't quite tell the whole story. So here's my analysis of what you're looking at and what to expect probably from this faction in the new General's Handbook. As the most popular faction, this means it's going to have the widest set of skill expression available. The wide skill expression of this faction means that it's better than the 49% win rate suggests. It's just evened out by lower skill expression. Sometimes you have armies that sit in the fat middle. This is between 45 and 55% win rate. But 1 or 2 list archetypes propels them to the top tables and really stand out as a army list. All this is so that you know if you see a low win rate on your faction or the faction that you hope to play, don't be too disheartened. There's more to this story than the numbers sometimes say. There are many factors that contribute to the win rate of an army, least of all the competitive gamers who take archetypes that aren't even very good and just generally cause me and the rest of the community a menace on the tabletop. You know you are. You know, Gavin. You know. The most popular subfaction for Stormcast is the Hammers of Sigmar. This is thanks to units gaining a 6+ ward while they're wholly within 12 inches of an objective and being able to take Dracoth as battle line. Stormcast armies are what we call an elite army. Elite armies are pretty much defined by having low wounds and low model counts, but they're all of a very high value. With an average save of 3+, the 6+ ward really helps maintain that small pool of wounds that's in the army. And they gain it while they're near the objective, which is where you're going to be because that's where you score points. The second most popular faction is Hallowed Knights, and that's all thanks to the superhero that is Goddess Steel Soul. He has a wholly within 12 inches, 5+ ward aura. This really showcases that they're weak to mortal wounds, which punch through the really good armor save that you pay a lot of points for. Having the ward save keeps the units more viable, which seems to be the pivot point of the army. So if you want to beat them, bring a lot of mortal wounds is what I'm trying to say. Battalions are groupings that you can put your army into and you get special bonuses for them. And the most popular in Age of Sigmar is the Battle Regiment, which makes your army or most of your army a 1-drop. There's so much information here that there is going to be a masterclass on deployment coming soon. While the second most taken battalion for Stormcast, it actually had the higher win rate. With Bounty Hunters going away as a battalion, as that was last General's Handbook, and there's a new General's Handbook that doesn't include it, I expect the Battle Regiment to be the most popular battalion for Stormcast. We should look at which armies the Stormcast list of Stormcast army is good into. We rate armies as bottom, middle, or top. Anything below 45% is bottom, between 45 and 55 is middle, and then, of course, over 55 is the top. At some points in the game's history, armies have played really well into the top. This is because the top has been dominated by one specific type of archetype. That's not necessarily true at the minute. However, Stormcast are interesting in that they're bottom-tier bullies, which is, I mean, is that any surprise? I mean, they're golden dudes who, like, lord it up over everyone else, like... It makes sense. So if we look at their stats, you can see that they're best into the bottom tier, or the armies that have a sub 55% win rate. Several factors are to blame for this. Mainly, those bottom tier armies struggle to produce a lot of mortal wounds, so they struggle to get through the high armor save that the Stormcast bring. This makes the Stormcast more survivable and able to dish out more damage over time. Therefore, they're more effective. Okay, let's break these units apart in what they do in the army. The way this list wins is it does whole loads of AoE damage to your army. I know this is going to sound really odd, as it's the Stormcast Eternals army, but we're going to start with the Slann. The Magic Toad's value is that it comes with most of its really strong abilities on its War Scroll, meaning it makes a really effective ally. So the Slann is a damage-dealing support caster. All wizards are support units because they can cast Mystic Shield. Mystic Shield add +1 to the save rolls for a unit, and combined with things like all-out defense, you can create a very survivable unit. They also obviously have the ability to unbind enemy spells and try to dispel endless spells. So a wizard's always a support unit. However, the Slann is a very good support unit. The Slann can generate up to 2 command points in your hero phase with the Foresight ability. Seeing as you get 2 command points for going second in a battle round, being able to generate 2 more is actually huge. It gives you a lot more resources to use in the game. The Slann is a 3-cast and unbind wizard, with +1 to those rolls thanks to the Master of Order ability, and can unbind and dispel from anywhere on the board, and that's on its War Scroll, which is amazing. Normally, you can only unbind from 30 inches away. The board's not that big. 30 inches covers most of the board, so being able to unbind from anywhere means you can have it further away so your opponent can't unbind your spells while you can unbind theirs. So think of him as a magic defender that's also a magic attacker at the back of the board. It's very cool. All of this works really well in conjunction with the Frog's War Scroll spell, Comet's Call. Comet's Call is one of those spells that anyone who's played Age of Sigmar competitively sometimes wakes up at night hearing, I'm going to cast Comet's Call. No! No! No, don't do it! No! Cast on a 7, you pick D3 units, and they take D3 mortal wounds each. If, however, you cast it on a 10 or more, then you get to pick D6 units. This is board wide. You can pick any unit anywhere on the board. Now, with +1 to cast from the War Scroll of the Slann itself, you have a 72% chance to cast this spell. But the Stardrake in this list has an ability called Arcane Lineage, which gives the Slann another +1 to cast. That pushes the odds up of casting Comet's Call to 83%, and if you want to cast it on a 10+, it's going to go up to 41%. My point is, it's very reliable. It can be done from outside of range of your opponent's ability to stop you, and there's no real defense that your opponent has to stop you from doing that damage. You can't screen or hide behind terrain that you can't see. It just hits any unit on the board. And it's the first in our long list of abilities in this archetype that does that. A long-range, survivable damage output support caster that's also a magic defender. The Slann is just an excellent piece as an ally or in its own army. The next unit is the Celestant-Prime, an absolute utilitarian beast and an unstoppable damage-dealing unit. Huge fan, massive tech, loads of quality, great unit. He also wields Sigmar's hammer. You know, Sigmar from the box, that guy. His hammer is called Galmaraz, and it starts off with 3 attacks. Now, the Celestant-Prime can be put into reserve thanks to the Retribution on High ability. At the end of any movement phase, you can deploy them outside of 9 inches of enemy units, and we call this deep striking. For every turn that you do this, you add +2 to Galmaraz's attacks. Imagine he's like, just winding that bad boy all the way. If you leave him off for 2 turns, you end up with 7 attacks at damage 3 each, doing a total of 21 damage. He's a great melee unit also because he's survivable. He has a 3-up armor save and a 4-up ward save. So an amazing melee damage dealer that's able to get into combat thanks to the ability Orrery of Celestial Fates. Orrery? This lets you choose the result of a charge roll, meaning you can always charge from deep strike. This is a legitimate threat. It's brilliant. Deep striking, so coming in from reserve or teleporting from outside of 9 inches of your opponent, has a risk-reward mechanic to it. Arriving 9 inches away means you have a 58% chance of making that charge successfully. This is why you see units like the Battle Mage of Gur with the spell Wild Form, and for Sylvaneth, the Spite Swarm Hive Endless spell that has the ability Vital Venoms, which adds +3 to charge rolls. You see them very often in lists, and that's because players are trying to make it so the chances of making those charges from deep strike are much higher. So it mitigates the risks in the risk versus reward, and the rewards are huge. Deep striking and then getting a successful charge means you can outmaneuver your opponent and also potentially threaten their key pieces. However, everything I've just mentioned is just additional stuff for this unit. Like, additional things. Like, good, great, makes it cool, but the main reason we're using this unit in this particular archetype is because of its Comet Strike Scepter. It's a ranged damage ability that is not a missile weapon, which means you can target units that normally you couldn't target with missile weapons. It does AoE mortal wound damage to every unit within 3 inches of a point that you pick, and that point that you pick can be 24 inches away from the Celestant-Prime. This happens in the shooting phase, which is obviously after the movement phase, meaning the unit can arrive from reserve and then use this ability, making it very hard for you to stop your opponent from hitting the key pieces you don't want it to hit. It also happens every shooting phase. It's not once per battle. So this means the Celestant-Prime alone has the ability to kill a 6-wound hero in your army. Also, if you ever get the opportunity to ally this guy into your army, it's a pretty good ally. At 25% of the army's cost, we have the Lord-Celestant on Stardrake. Previously called a potato, a useless sausage, a goober by some online commentators, not me, obviously. It was me. I said that. Very food-based insults for some reason. It adds a lot to this list, while fulfilling the role of a damage dealer, a support unit, and also pinning. A massive 18 wounds on a 3-up save means it's quite survivable, but susceptible to mortal wounds. It has a really large base, so when moving forward, it's going to be able to pin the opponent back, and with a 3+ armor save, 18 wounds, and the ability to save stack, it's going to be able to do that job really well. And while it's pinning the opponent back, the rest of your army is doing mortal wounds at range. As a damage dealer, it's not as scary necessarily as its form suggests. It does okay damage. It does have a special ability called the Cavernous Jaws, which allows you to eat up to 3 models from the opposing unit in an enemy army. A good trick is to eat the unit leader in the opposing unit, meaning they can't use command abilities for the unit. In the pinning role, the Stardrake starts out with a good save and can use Mystic Shield, All-Out Defense, and also Finest Hour, meaning it can have a 2-up armor save, ignoring up to Ren 2. It also has a special piece of war gear called the Sigmarite Shield. This means any 6-up that the Stardrake makes to save is going to reflect 1 mortal wound back to the unit that's attacking it in melee. So this is just a really great unit to charge into your opponent's army that has a lot of attacks, but not a lot of rend. They'll end up doing more damage themselves than they will do to the Stardrake. In the support role, it adds +1 to cast to friendly wizards within 12 inches, which, when you give it the Arcane Tome artifact, includes itself. The Arcane Tome makes a unit a wizard. I mean, I still think generic artifacts were not really planned out properly, but that's a different conversation. The command trait that the Stardrake has is the Master of Magic, which can be taken by any faction. Master of Magic is going to allow you to reroll your cast, and with +1 to cast naturally, it makes it better than most base wizards. This means the Everblaze Comet, which we'll be talking about soon, is going to be very reliably cast by the Stardrake. Lastly, the list is named after the Stardrake shooting attack, the Rain of Stars. It really should be the Rain of Comets. It's like the Everblaze Comet and Comet's Call and the Comet Scepter. Like, I don't really know where they got stars from, but the Rain of Stars shooting attack has 4 shots that are rend 3 at 30 inches, meaning armor is basically useless, and it can do up to 8 damage. The final part of the AoE damage puzzle is the Everblaze Comet, the endless spell only usable by Stormcast Eternals. It's a damage-dealing spell that you can set up within 36 inches, and it's cast on a 6. 36 inches is far. It's roughly this far. After it's cast, it affects every unit within 10 inches, and they reliably take D3 mortal wounds, but a third of the time they're going to take D6 mortal wounds. And with the Stardrake reinforcing that damage with its shooting attack, you could very comfortably take out monsters and enemy big threats turn 1. So that's the trick. Bunker Buster, Circle of Fire. It relies heavily on casting spells, but the magic is reliable. Let me know what you think about this part of the list. Of course, the Stardrake and the Celestant-Prime are legitimate damage dealers in their own right, but the artillery fire of Comet's Call, the Everblaze Comet, the Stardrake shooting attack, and the Celestant-Prime shooting attack really feels like it's got something very impressive as a list. In the rest of the list, though, there is a massive damage-dealing unit of 4 Fulminators. Outrageous damage from 4 models doing up to 21 damage per model in melee. The Riders are equipped with a Stormstrike Glaive, and it gets +2 to the damage on the charge with 5 attacks each. The Stardrake's job is to pin the enemy in so that the Fulminators can charge and do all of their damage. They're a medium speed at movement 10 inches, but they have a great defensive profile with 6 wounds each and a 3-up armor save. Having a unit of 4 is quite useful versus a unit of 2 because you get some economy of resources spent on them, like all-out attack or a mystic shield. You affect more wounds in your army with each ability that you use because it's a larger unit. There are obviously downsides as well in that you can only really apply pressure or the damage from these units in one place at one time. Most importantly though, you have great depth to lose models. You can lose up to 3 Fulminators from the unit and then you can start to use the rally command ability. I mean, you could have used it earlier, but that depth, i.e. losing more and more wounds before the unit is wiped out, means that you've got the opportunity to hit a rally, which will generate one of those slain models back on a 6. So you're sometimes seeing units being reinforced up to a larger number, so it can take some damage, and then you can return that unit back to a higher efficiency level. Every chance you get to use rally on these guys, you should probably take it. Being able to roll a 6 and bring one of these back is very excellent. They also have a shooting attack, which really adds to the other damage that we were talking about earlier. They shoot 12 inches and they potentially do D3 mortal wounds. That combined with their movement 10 gives them a 22-inch effective threat range. On average, you should just do 4 mortal wounds from this unit in the shooting, but you do have the potential to do up to 12 mortal wounds, which is really going to add to all the other mortal wounds that you're doing earlier in the hero phase. The 2 units of Vanquishers make up the screening units in the army and make up the needed battle line. Sometimes battle line is attacks in an army, as you need 3 battle line units in a 2,000-point army. These are a very cheap and effective choice. Each unit has 10 wounds each on a 4-up armor save, and they have a 5-up rally on their war scroll. They're also very effective into hordes, gaining additional attacks. They are just the best and cheapest unit in their tier in this battle tome. Screen with them and hold objectives. There's a cute trick you can do with the Stardrake and the free command point that's available on its war scroll. You can use this to use the command ability Call for Aid and regenerate one of the slain units back. It's cute, it's fun, it's a useful little trick and tool inside the army, but it isn't really the main purpose of the army. So finally, we have the Farstriders, which are an underworld warband. Their main ability is that they can teleport, which is going to be useful for either holding an objective or achieving a battle tactic. And if the need arises, it could also be used as a screening unit. It's cheap and it has some utility to score points, so it's a very good inclusion in the list. So to recap, the list has got 3 main melee damage units: the Fulminators, the Stardrake, and the Celestant-Prime. and its main focus is doing large amounts of damage at range using spellcasting and shooting to do AoE mortal wound damage. The strategy of the list is to weaken the enemy resources as fast as possible. If this army can maintain consistent damage across turns, it will do really well, but as each major piece falls, its ability to output really goes down fast. So using the list, just attack all of the enemy key pieces with all of the mortal wounds at range as quickly as you can, screen with the units that you can screen with, pin in units with the Stardrake, and then countercharge with the Fulminators to do maximum damage. Let's take a look at some example deployments for this army. Owen has sent me this example deployment, and you can see here he has 2 units of screening Vanquishers at the front. A pivotal part of this list is maintaining the Fulminator's ability to charge and do all of that extra damage. The Stardrake is taking up position in front of them in case anything is able to smash through the Vanquishers and get into the Fulminators. Similarly, we can see that Owen has used the Farstriders to screen out the Slann. This is a second line of screen, and we call this defense in depth. Also, the Stardrake is buffing the Slann with his aura, giving the Slann the additional +1 to cast. The Celestant-Prime is obviously in Deep Strike. He can elect to bring this down even on turn 1, so if he wants to add additional mortal wounds into the enemy army, he's going to be able to do so. Here's a picture from Owen's first turn at the Las Vegas Open. As you can see, he has brought the Celestant-Prime down on the board and is screening with his Vanquishers in cover in front of the enemy army. The Stardrake and the other Vanquishers are again screening those Fulminators, and the Slann is at the very back of the board. It's really important to remember that those Fulminators will do a huge amount of damage on the charge. A really massive portion of Age of Sigmar is controlling the board so that you can get the charges or engage with the units that you want to engage with. It's a very difficult skill to explain or express. It requires so many other elements to understand and know. You need to understand how units trade, you need to understand where objectives are, and you need to understand threat ranges. And ultimately, this entire thing pivots on the fact that we use the priority roll in Age of Sigmar, so the game is very fluid. It's one of the really exciting things. It's one of the things I really love about the game state, is that you're able to express skill at a very high level with these armies. That does mean, though, that explaining how these armies work in detail is very, very challenging. But hopefully over these series of videos, I'm going to be able to achieve that, and you're going to be able to understand these better. Well, that's my hope, at least. You can see at the top of the board, all of the enemy units clumped around each other. This is prime opportunity for the Prime, the Comet, to do all of that AoE mortal damage in the middle. If the Skaven army wants to try and charge forward and charge either of the 2 units of Vanquishers or the Stardrake, they're going to get countercharged by the Fulminators and definitely wiped out. Again, as always, loads to learn. And my very best advice, if you get the opportunity, is to check out one of our live streams on Objective Zone when we're covering competitive events. It's super fun watching players at a very high level play with these armies to a high degree. I personally love it, and I hope you will too. The list is really effective into other lists or armies that want to use overlapping synergy. The new Gloomspite Kits book, for example, we use loads of heroes and smaller units to buff some of the larger pieces in the army. Seraphon also castle up and do the same sort of thing. And Lumineth, as we talked about in the last Army Masterclass video, also like to bubble up as well. But thankfully for them, they're going to have a 4-up spell ignore. I read a lot of the comments from all of you in the last Army Masterclass video, and one of the key points was, can you give us tips and tricks to try to beat the current army? Each matchup and battle plan will change the win condition of how you're potentially going to beat the opposing army, but I'm going to try my hardest to give you some tips and tricks and some strategies for trying to beat this list. Ultimately though, and I know it's super lame to say, but knowing how your army works really well and practicing and playing lots of games is always the easiest way to get good at Warhammer. Right, first up, counter magic will work really well into this list. So either using auto unbinds, rerollable dispels, or unbinds are going to be very, very effective. If you're able to stop the Everblaze Comet and Comet's Call, that's going to massively reduce how much output they're able to put into your army. Stormcast hate mortal wounds. They don't have a lot of wounds in their army. Each one is valuable, so just pile on the mortal wounds into their army to just do maximum damage. Sometimes when we talk about those key pieces like the Fulminators or the Stardrake, it seems like those are the obvious units to take out. However, in some cases, what you can do is you can take out the supporting pieces like the Vanquishers, and then that's going to really reduce their ability to hold objectives. Another tip is if you can charge the Fulminators, before they charge you, you're going to be able to reduce how much damage they're doing by up to a third. They also don't have retreat and charge, so once they're locked, or as we call it, pinned in, then they will have to spend a turn withdrawing and hoping they get another turn to be able to charge that unit back in. Another important point, and this is more difficult to do, especially with all the shooting available, but if you can screen the board and make it so that the Prime can't land and kill some of your key pieces, always be conscious and aware of the fact that the Prime is off the board and is going to drop down and can definitely achieve its charge. Finally, spread your army out. Your opponent does want you to do that so they can pick you apart, but you just cannot allow your opponent to do all that damage to all your key pieces on the first turn. So make it so that they can't do that. I've tried really hard to express just how much damage this is going to do in a very small, concentrated area, so just don't stand together. There are other versions of the Bunker Buster archetype, and my favorite, by far, is the 6 Boom Banner. The main trick, I don't even know if it's a trick, the main thing is taking 6 Night Vexillers. They have an ability, or it's a flag actually, called the Meteoric Standard. Once per battle, you can pick a point within 24 inches, and every unit within 6 inches of that take D3 mortal wounds. Okay, Rob, that's once per battle. Who cares? But what if we do it 6 times? Then, what if we make one of those Night Vexillers our general, give them the Master of Magic, and give them the Arcane Tome, so they can also cast the Comet? 6 D3 plus potentially either another D3 or D6 mortal wounds into one spot on the battlefield is amazing fun. And it's also not a meme. It went 5-0 at CanCon. It's amazing. If there are other Bunker Buster lists, I'd love to hear about them. So write them in the comments. Let me know. If you've got a Bunker Buster list archetype, I would love to hear about it. Before we wrap up, I just want to say that I have a Patreon, and it would be awesome if you could subscribe and help me get an editor this year. I like to make more content, but the bottleneck at the moment is editing the videos, and if you could help me, that would be awesome, so then I can make more videos. I just have so many video ideas in my head that I just don't have time to make them all, and I just want to speed that process up. And yeah, anyway, that would be cool. Maybe I also get a new shirt. That would be fun. Another thing that you all suggested the last time I made this video was that I told you what the rating system was. So we're going to rate these armies from 0 to 10 goblins. Some people will think it's an arbitrary goblin-based numbering system, but it really isn't. It's so important. We're going to rate this army as a 7 out of 10 goblins to win the event. It's a pretty good list, but also it has some tough matchups, and it really struggles on both the primary, so holding objectives, and also some battle tactics. It does, in this GHB though, have some Galician champions, and they're going to be fairly useful. Its difficulty to use is kind of interesting. I give it a 6 out of 10, specifically because it's low on some resources, specifically holding objectives. Therefore, you're going to have to be really conscious of what your opponent's army does, so where you're going to apply the damage to their army. If you don't have very good system mastery and you're not really sure exactly what in your opponent's army is dangerous, then that's going to make it difficult to use this army. Difficulty to produce is like a 5 out of 10. There's not that many models, so it's pretty easy to do, and Stormcast are relatively simple to put together. The big issue is obviously going to be that Stardrake. It's a big piece, and that's a lot to paint and put together. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, like last time, if you have any thoughts on what I can do better, please do leave them in the comments below. I'm trying my hardest to make these videos as good as possible, and I just really would value your feedback. Thanks very much, and thanks for being honest, Wargamers.